All right. So, Mr. Adams here. I'm going to try to give you a rundown of a best way to understand and explain Amendments 2 through 10. If you missed the classes the other day, I'm going to try to keep this video as short as I can. So, bear with me. Second Amendment. I'm going to make a whole separate video so I can go on a full blown rant about this because I believe the Second Amendment is the biggest mistake of our country, more than racism, more than poverty. Our gun problem is the biggest thing that I think is wrong with this country. And it leads from the Second Amendment or the misinterpretation of the Second Amendment. So, just for the quick explainer for this video, what the Second Amendment actually says is in order to have a well regulated militia, which is necessary for a free state, the right of the citizens to bear arms shall not be infringed. What they're getting at is on the left here, this old militia that we had when we were colonists who were going to fight a war against the British Army, and we wanted all of our citizens to have a gun just in case they needed to be ready to fight in a minute's notice. It was these one-shot musket rifles that they were talking about, not nowadays as we have these military-grade, high-powered weapons of mass destruction that people are roaming the neighborhoods with, going into schools and malls with. But the Second Amendment is what protects Americans' right to own guns, to have as many guns as they want. It's a mess. I'll talk about this in another video. I'm going to skip 3 because I'll circle back and hit that at the end of the video, and you'll see why. Fourth and Fifth Amendment are called the rights of the accused. So the Fourth Amendment famously allows people to not have their personal property either searched or taken without there first being a warrant issued. So police cannot just come up to you and start searching you just on suspicion. They cannot ask you to open your trunk of your car, your glove box, or anything if you get pulled over. They cannot just come into your business or even like your home without reasonable suspicion that you've committed some sort of a crime or that you have some sort of illegal item. And then they have to go to a judge with enough proof that the judge would issue a warrant allowing the police to search your private property or your house or your personal possessions or whatever. So the Fourth Amendment is basically no illegal search or seizure. Now, let's say, as I called a couple students out the other day, let's say I give the example that you were accused of stealing $200 worth of Takis. And turns out, they found some empty Taki bags in your car. So they think that you did, in fact, steal these Takis. The Fifth Amendment is when you're being put under arrest. This is famously called the Miranda rights. When they read you your rights, you might see this from a TV show or movies, where they say, you have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney. Anything you do or say can and will be used you against a court of law. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided to you. Blah, 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 blah. That's called reading someone their rights. That's the Fifth Amendment. The right is that you have obviously the right to not say anything. I plead the Fifth, to not incriminate yourself. You have the right to a lawyer or an attorney, no matter what. And you also have the right to not be tried for the same crime twice. That if you've been found innocent of a crime at one point, even if they later find more evidence that proves you guilty, you cannot be tried at that same crime a second time. The Sixth and Seventh Amendment follow in order in the assumption that you're now in court. The Sixth Amendment mainly deals with when you're being accused of a crime where you broke the law. And the Seventh Amendment is when you're accused of a crime, not necessarily for breaking the law, but just between two private civilians. So the Sixth Amendment allows you to have a fair, public, speedy trial, the right to a jury, the right to confront witnesses, to have witnesses, obviously also the right to an attorney as well. So the court proceedings that you see on movies and TV are typically all the rights of the Sixth Amendment. A good way to remember this one is that if you are a runner and you can run a whole mile in 6 minutes, that's extremely fast. That's a very, very fit person. So if you can run a 6-minute mile, that's very quick. So 6-minute mile, right to a speedy trial. Sixth Amendment is the right to a speedy trial, 6-minute mile. 7, once again, as you can see from my picture down on the right-hand corner, let's say we get in a car accident and we can't decide on how much money we should be compensated for the damages. I might take you to court over that. And that's where 7 allows you to also have the right to a jury, even if it's just between two civilians, private citizens, who did not break the law, but they still want to have a jury of their peers hear the case and help decide who's right. So civil, 7, 7, civil, civil, 7, 7, civil. That's a good way to keep those two in your mind to differentiate. 6-minute mile is right to a speedy trial for breaking the law. 7 is just between civilians. Now, if you are punished, whether you are found guilty, whether you're in the process of being held for a trial, number 8 says that there is no either excessive bail or cruel or unusual punishment. Bail would be the money that you'd have to put up in order to be released from jail while you're waiting trial. So in this case, if you were accused of stealing $200 worth of Takis, they cannot make bail $1 million because that's way too much. That's saying that the punishment doesn't fit the crime. That's unreasonable. Sometimes they don't allow bail. If there's someone who's committed a very, very serious crime, like multiple murders, then they don't even allow them to be free for a little bit. But more, I think what most people know about the Eighth Amendment is the cruel or unusual punishment part. We no longer have torture. That's not allowed. All these different forms of like hanging people or putting them in stocks as punishment. We still treat our prisoners, even the most corrupt prisoners, as humanely as possible. We legally give them food, water, and shelter. And that even if some states allow people to be put to death, some don't, but some do, even if there is the death penalty in a state, it's done as humanely as possible, which right now is by lethal injection. So we no longer put people to death by like burning them on fire or cutting their head off or hanging them or using the electric chair. That's cruel punishment, and we don't allow that anymore. So the last 3 are, I think, random, but I can see why they were necessary at the time to finish up the Bill of Rights. So the Third Amendment doesn't apply at all nowadays. The Third Amendment basically says that you do not have to have soldiers housed in your personal property. Why that took place back then is we had the British soldiers occupying the colonies, and the colonists were forced to keep the soldiers in their house. Obviously, people have a lot of problems with that, and so that's why that was the Third Amendment. Clearly, when it was the third, it shows that that was the third most important thing to them at the time when they first wrote the Constitution. Right after their First Amendment rights, Second Amendment, don't take my gun away. Third Amendment, soldiers don't have to stay with you. So it was clearly very important at a time, but it never comes into play anymore because we never have foreign soldiers. And even our domestic soldiers, they have bases to stay at. So never really applies anymore. So yeah, the cartoon, the guy's saying, no, you can't crash on my couch and get that tank out of my yard. So then the 9th and 10th Amendment, they are writing all these list of things that they're going to protect, and they recognize that they can't think of every single little thing that you have a right to. So the 9th Amendment is this random catch-all amendment that basically just says people have rights. And just because the Constitution doesn't specifically say you have the right to do something, just know you have the right to do it. You have the right to be happy. You have the right to eat an apple or not eat an apple if you want. And the Constitution doesn't have to specifically say that you have the right to eat an apple for you to know that you have that right. So it's very silly, but it's just a clause that was put in there just to be clear that like the Constitution was going to be very specific about some things, but just because it forgot to list everything, don't forget, common sense still comes into play. And then number 10 is similar. Number 10 basically says that unless it's a specific federal government power or federal government right, then it defers to the states instead. So the states maintain every right and every decision if it's not explicitly one that's going to be affected by all 50 states. So the federal government handles things like national money, armies and navies, the post office, stuff like that, running the airline industry. But when it comes to actual states, the states have the rights on their own to decide certain things like the extent of medical marijuana, gun rights, school education laws, um, abortion, death penalty, stuff like that. So the 10th Amendment is basically also kind of a catch-all safety net that basically says that anything that's not listed in the Constitution that says specifically a federal power, give it to the states to handle. So it's been a lot that covers everything, though. Hopefully that's been helpful. On a recap from Amendment